There is a kind of silence that has weight to it, and I felt the full weight of it the morning we carried Corporal Aldous Wren into the cathedral. I had stood in that nave 100 times for occasions of state, but I had never heard it go that quiet. 6 of us bore the coffin on our shoulders, and our boots struck the stone in a slow cadence I had drilled into those men myself, and between each step there was nothing, no cough, no whisper, not the rustle of a coat. 1,000 mourners held their breath at once, and the held breath of 1,000 people is louder than any sound a crowd can make. I am the officer who walked at the head of that bier. My name is of no consequence to this story. I have spent 30 years learning to make myself of no consequence, to be the steady line a younger man can dress his shoulders against. But I will tell you what I was thinking behind a face that gave nothing away, because what happened at the end of that day was the one time in my career I allowed a man under my command to break the protocol I had spent my life guarding, and I would do it again. Aldous Wren was 26 years old. He had served 4 years in the household guard of our kingdom, and he had been the finest young soldier I ever had the privilege to ruin sleep over. He was the one who arrived before the others and left after them. He was the one who, when a new recruit's hands shook on the parade square, would murmur the count under his breath so the boy could find the rhythm and never be seen to fail. He had married a girl named Marin the spring before, in a small chapel with the regiment's blessing and not much else, and they had been saving for a flat with a window that caught the morning. He had died in a manner I will not dwell on here, because the manner is not the point, and the dead deserve better than to be reduced to it. It is enough to say he died doing his duty, doing it well, and doing it for someone smaller and more frightened than himself. That was the whole of Aldous Wren in a single sentence, and it was also the whole of him in life. The cathedral was the great one in the capital, the one with the stone kings asleep along the walls and the high windows that turn ordinary daylight into something that seems to come from elsewhere. I had given the order of service my own hand. Every step was mapped. The bearer party would carry him up the central aisle, set him upon the catafalque before the altar, and we would render the slow salute and withdraw to our posts along the chancel rail, where we would stand the vigil through the eulogies and the prayers, motionless, until the final carry-out. Protocol does not bend for grief. That is the cruelty of it, and also, I had always believed, its mercy. When a man cannot trust his own legs to hold him up, the protocol holds him up instead. You do not feel, you execute. You let the form carry what the heart cannot. I had told the bearer party as much at dawn in the cold yard behind the barracks, our breath fogging in the lamplight. 5 men, hand-picked, each of them a friend of the man in the box. You will feel everything today, I said, and you will show none of it. He earned a flawless carry, and we are going to give him one. Grieve tomorrow, today you are stone. They had nodded. They were good men. I believed every one of them would hold. The one I watched most was Private Tomas Calder. Calder was the youngest of the 6, 22, and Wren had been the one who brought him through his first year. Wren had stood beside him on his first night vigil when Calder's nerve nearly went, had taught him to lock his knees the right way so a man can stand 4 hours without fainting, had covered for him the one time he was late and never let him forget it and never let anyone else find out. They were not just comrades. Calder had no brother, and Wren had become one. I had hesitated to put him in the bearer party at all. But when I read the roster aloud and reached Wren's name and the silence that followed it, Calder had stepped forward before I finished and said, "I'll carry him, sir." His voice did not waver. I should have heard the thing underneath it. I did. I let him carry anyway because I thought, I still think, that a man has a right to bear his brother to the altar, and to deny him that to protect a protocol would have been the smaller wrong. So we carried Aldous Wren up the long aisle in the elsewhere light, and the kingdom watched. They watched in the flesh. The front pews held the household, the senior officers, the gray men of the council, and behind them the ranks of the regiment in their dress reds, and behind them the ordinary people who had queued since the night before to stand at the back and at the sides and out into the square. And they watched on the screens, because the cameras of the state broadcaster were mounted high in the gallery, discreet and unblinking, carrying the service to every town in the country. I was aware of them the way you are aware of a held weapon, not looking, always knowing. I had reminded the men of the cameras too. Whatever happens, I had said, it happens in front of the whole nation. Hold. We reached the catafalque. We lowered him, and lowering a coffin in perfect unison is harder than carrying it, the whole strength of 6 men spending itself slowly through the arms, so that the box seems to settle on its own like something deciding to rest. We got it level. We stepped back the regulation pace. And on my count, 6 right hands rose in the slow salute, the white gloves climbing in a single motion and held and came down. It was flawless. I want that recorded. Up to that moment, the carry was the finest I have ever been part of, and Aldous Wren would have been proud of every man who bore him, and proudest of all of the boy he had taught to lock his knees. Then we turned to take our posts at the chancel rail, and I saw the widow. Marin Wren sat in the first pew, alone in the center of it, though the pew was full, the way the recently bereaved are always alone in a crowd. She wore black and a veil she had put back from her face, because she had told the chaplain she would not hide on the day they honored her husband. She was perhaps 23. In her arms she held a small bundle, and the bundle was a son not yet 4 months old, a son Aldous Wren had held exactly 11 times before he was sent away, and had described to every man in the barracks in exhausting and wonderful detail. The boy had Wren's ears. We had all agreed on that, laughing, in another life that had ended a fortnight ago. She was not weeping. That was the thing that undid the room, I think, more than weeping would have. She sat with her chin level and her eyes fixed on the box that held the man she had married 14 months before, and she held their son against the place where her heart was, and she was trying, you could see her trying with everything she had, to do the same thing I had ordered my men to do, to show none of it, to be stone, to get through the form so the form could carry her. And I watched Private Tomas Calder, at his post 6 feet from her, look at the wife and the son of the brother he had just laid down, and I watched the stone begin to crack. I want to be precise about what I mean, because the cracking of a guardsman is not a dramatic thing. It is the smallest thing in the world, and that is why it is so dangerous. From the gallery, from the pews, from the cameras, Calder looked exactly as he was meant to look, a young man in dress red standing at attention at the chancel rail, rifle grounded, eyes front, jaw set. To anyone who had not spent 30 years reading the faces of men trained to have no face, he was perfect. But I had spent 30 years reading exactly that, and I saw his breathing change. I saw the careful 4-count rhythm Wren had taught him go ragged for half a second and then be hauled back. I saw the tendon stand out in his neck. I saw him fix his eyes on a point on the far wall, above and beyond the coffin and the widow, the way you teach a man to do when the thing in front of him is more than he can stand to look at. He was doing everything right. He was fighting with the only weapons I had given him, the form and the count and the eyes front, and he was losing, and he knew he was losing, and the knowing made it worse. I could not go to him. I was at my own post at the head of the chancel, and to break formation during the service would itself be the scandal I was trying to prevent. So I did the only thing an officer can do across 30 feet of cathedral. I caught the eyes front line of his gaze just for an instant, and I held it, and I gave him the only order I could give without moving my lips. Steady. Hold. I am here. He found me. For a moment he steadied. The tendon eased, and the chaplain began to speak. I should tell you that Calder was not the only man fighting. 2 posts down stood Sergeant Eli Vance, who had served 20 years and had taught Wren the things I taught the sergeants to teach. Vance had a face like a closed door and the steadiest hands in the regiment, and Vance had wept exactly once that I knew of, at his own father's grave, and not since. He held the vigil like a man carved out of the cathedral stone itself, and only I, who knew him, could see what it was costing him, the faint tremor he had locked down into absolute stillness by sheer will, the way a man holds a wound closed with his own hand, and does not let go because letting go means bleeding. Vance had identified the body. The regiment does not let a stranger do that for one of its own. A man who knew the soldier goes, so that the last person to look on him is family. Vance had gone. He had not spoken of it. He stood his post now as though nothing in the world could move him, and the cost of that pretense was written in the white of his knuckles where they gripped the rifle. And I thought, watching him, that we ask an impossible thing of these men. We ask them to feel everything and show nothing, and we call it discipline, and most days it is the truest discipline there is. But I was beginning to wonder, that morning, whether there were days it was something closer to a cruelty we had simply agreed to call by a nobler name. I filed the thought where I file such things, behind the unmoving face, and I returned my attention to the service. But it stayed with me. It was waiting for me when the moment came. I will not give you the eulogy in full. Eulogies for soldiers are made of the same good words, and the words are true, and they are never enough, and everyone in the room knows both of those things at once. The chaplain spoke of duty freely given. He spoke of a young man who had run toward what others ran from. He spoke of the regiment as a family, and at that word I felt the whole rank of dress reds behind the front pews stiffen, because it was not a figure of speech to us. It was the literal architecture of our lives, and the family had a hole in it now in the exact shape of Aldous Wren. Then the chaplain said the thing that nearly finished us all. He said that Aldous had a son, and that the son would grow up knowing his father not as a man he remembered, but as a man he was told about, and that it would fall to all of us, the regiment and the kingdom both, to be the ones who told him true. And the boy in Marin's arms, who had been asleep, chose that moment to wake. He did not cry. He made the small, searching, conversational sound that very young children make, a rising note that asks a question of the air, and in that silence it carried to the back of the nave. Marin went rigid. I saw her face, and for the first time the stone she had built broke open, not into weeping, but into something rawer, a kind of horror at her own helplessness, because her child was awake and asking for a world that no longer contained his father, and there was nothing, nothing at all, that she could do about it. She bent her head over him. Her shoulders began to shake. She was trying not to make a sound, and the effort of not making a sound was tearing her apart in front of 1,000 people and a nation of cameras, and not one of those 1,000 people could help her, because protocol held the entire room in its grip, and the protocol said, "This is grief, and grief is born in silence, and no one moves." That is the moment I have replayed more than any other in my life, because I understood, standing at my post with my own face giving nothing away, that the protocol I had served for 30 years had just become the cruelest thing in the room. It was holding us all upright, and it was leaving a young widow utterly alone in the one moment she least deserved to be, and those two truths were the same truth, and I had no answer to it. There is no line in the order of service for what to do when the form you have built to carry grief becomes the thing that crushes the grieving. And 6 feet from her, Private Tomas Calder turned his head. It was a small turn, 3 or 4 inches, enough to take his eyes off the point on the far wall and bring them down to the widow and the waking child. By the letter of everything I had ever taught him, it was a failure of discipline, a break in the vigil, the precise thing I had stood in the cold yard at dawn and forbidden. Every senior man in the front pews would have seen it. The cameras would have caught it. In 30 seconds, it would be a young guardsman who could not hold himself together at a state funeral, and the regiment would wear that small shame for a year. I drew a breath to stop him. I had the means, a hard look, the smallest gesture of the hand, and Calder would have snapped back to the wall and held, because he was a good soldier and he would obey me even through his own breaking heart. I had stopped men before. It is most of what an officer does. He is the wall a younger man's worst impulse breaks against. I drew the breath and I prepared to be that wall. And then I did not stop him. I want to tell you exactly why, because it is the heart of everything, and because I have had to defend the decision since to men who outrank me by a great deal. I did not stop him because I saw, in the 3 or 4 inches of that turn, that Calder was not breaking discipline. He was choosing it. There is a difference, and it took me most of my life to learn it. A man breaks when grief overwhelms him and his body does what it wants. But Calder's face, when it came down off the wall and settled on the widow, was not the face of a man overwhelmed. It was calm. It was decided. The ragged breathing was gone. The tendon in his neck had eased. He had stopped fighting to hold the form, and in the same instant he had found something steadier than the form to stand on. I had seen that exact look on the face of Aldous Wren more than once. In the moment Wren decided that the right thing and the regulation thing were not the same thing, and that he would answer to the right thing and take whatever came. Calder had learned it from him. Of course he had. It was the truest thing Wren ever taught. So I held my breath instead of spending it, and I watched my youngest guardsman do the thing I had forbidden. And I did not move to stop him, and may every officer who ever judged me for it understand that it was the proudest order I never gave. Calder did not leave his post. That is the part the later accounts always get wrong. He did not stride into the aisle or make a scene. What he did was smaller and 100 times harder. He shifted his rifle. He brought it from the ground to the slope of his shoulder in the slow, formal motion of the present. The movement a guardsman makes to render the highest honor in his vocabulary. The salute under arms that we give to the sovereign and to the colors, and to nothing and no one else. It is not a gesture you offer to a private citizen. It is reserved by centuries of custom for the crown itself. And Tomas Calder, 22 years old, standing the vigil at his brother's funeral, brought his rifle to the present and offered that salute, not to the altar, not to the coffin, not to the council in the front pew. He offered it to the widow. I felt the front pews understand it before I heard them. A current went through the senior men, the smallest stiffening, the kind of ripple that passes through trained people when they witness something that should not be happening and cannot look away from it. One of the council, a gray man named Lord Harrowmere, who had buried protocol breaches deeper than most men bury their dead, half rose from his seat. I saw his hand close on the pew rail. He looked at Calder, and then, because that is what such men do, he looked at me, the officer responsible, to see whether I would correct it. I did not look back at him. I kept my eyes on Calder, and I let Lord Harrowmere see that I had chosen not to stop it, which is its own kind of statement, and I watched what my guardsman did next. Because the salute was not the whole of it. The salute was the opening of a sentence. Holding the present and holding it perfectly, the rifle vertical and unwavering, the white glove exact, a posture that costs the muscles dearly and that he held as though it cost nothing, Calder spoke. He did not raise his voice. The cathedral was so silent that he did not need to. He said 8 words, and the high stone carried them to the back of the nave, and the microphones in the gallery carried them to the kingdom, and I have heard them repeated since by people who were not born when they were spoken. He said, "Ma'am, he asked me to, the salute I owed him." I did not understand it in that moment. The widow did. Her head came up off the child. She looked at Calder for the first time, really looked, and something moved across her ruined face that I can only call recognition, as though a door she had thought sealed forever had opened a hand's breadth and let in a single thread of light. I learned the rest later in pieces, from Calder and from Marin and from the chaplain, and I will give it to you here so the salute makes sense, though Calder gave it to no one in the cathedral and did not need to. The winter before, on a black night vigil in the rain, Wren and Calder had talked the way men talk on the long posts when the cold has scoured everything down to what is true. Calder had confessed something that shamed him, that on the night of the regiment's commendation parade, the night his own father had died across the country in a hospital he could not reach, he had stood his post and rendered the salute to the colors and felt nothing, because all his feeling was 100 miles away at a bedside, and he had never forgiven himself for the hollowness of that salute. He had given the form and withheld the man. He told Wren he did not know how a soldier was supposed to honor what he truly loved when the rules only ever let him salute the things the rules chose. And Wren, Calder told me this with his jaw clenched so hard I thought it would break. Wren had said, "Then when it matters, salute the thing you love and let them court-martial you. The rules are how we honor the kingdom, but a man only gets a few chances in his life to honor what he'd actually die for, and you don't waste them on the wall. You spend them on the people." He had clapped Calder on the shoulder in the rain and said, half laughing, that if Calder ever truly owed someone the highest thing he had, he should give it to them and not to the regulations, and that he, Wren, would take the punishment detail with him for company. 8 weeks later Wren was dead, having done precisely that, having spent the highest thing he had, his own life, on a person rather than a rule. And Calder, standing the vigil, holding the form, fighting to be stone, had understood with sudden and total clarity that the man in the box had earned a salute that no regulation in the order of service would ever allow him to render. There was no line for it. The state would honor Aldous Wren with a flawless ceremony and a folded standard and a marker in the regimental yard, and all of it would be the form, and none of it would be the salute that one young soldier owed another for teaching him how to stand and how to live and how to love something enough to break a rule for it. So Calder had found the way. He could not salute Wren. Wren was past saluting, and a salute to a coffin is a salute to the dead, which is the form again. But Wren had told him to spend the highest honor on the people, and the person Aldous Wren had loved most in this world, the person he had run toward in every thought of his last weeks, the person sitting 6 feet away holding the sun with Wren's ears and breaking apart in enforced silence, that was Marin. To salute the widow was to salute the man through the only door grief had left open. It was the salute Calder owed his friend, paid to the one Aldous Wren would have wanted to receive it. The salute I owed him. 8 words, the whole of it. I understood none of that in the cathedral. What I understood in the cathedral was that my youngest guardsman was holding the present in honor of a grieving widow, that a member of the council was on his feet, that 1,000 mourners and a kingdom of cameras were watching, that I had 3 seconds to decide whether the household guard would be remembered for a breach or for something else entirely, and that whatever I decided would be the most consequential order of my career. And I made it. I left my post. In 30 years I had never broken formation during a service. I broke it then. I came down off the head of the chancel, not fast, never fast. An officer does not scuttle, and I walked the regulation pace into the open space before the catafalque where the whole nation could see me, and the ripple in the front pews became something with no name, and Lord Harrowmere's mouth opened, and I did not give him the chance to use it. I went to Private Tomas Calder, and I did not order him to stand down. I drew my own sword. It came from the scabbard with the soft ring that good steel makes, and in that silence the sound was enormous, and I saw Calder's eyes flick to me for a fraction of a second with something close to terror in them, because he thought, of course he thought, that the blade meant the end of his career was beginning, that the officer had come to make an example of him in front of the kingdom. I gave him the smallest shake of the head. Not that. Then I turned to face the widow, and I brought my sword to the carry, and I rendered the officer's salute, the slow sweep of the blade, hilt to the lips, point to the ground, the salute an officer gives to the colors and the crown, and I held it beside my guardsman in honor of Marin Wren. I have been asked many times what I was thinking. The truth is plain. I was thinking that Calder was right, and that I had spent 30 years being the wall a young man's truest impulse breaks against, and that exactly once before I retired, I would rather be the thing that stands beside it. I was thinking that Aldous Wren had earned a salute the order of service could not give him, and that his student had found the way to give it, and that an officer who would let a private take that risk alone was no officer at all. I was thinking that if there was to be a court-martial, it should begin with me. And under all of it, in a place I do not often let myself go, I was thinking that I had loved that young man too, the way you love the best of the ones you are responsible for, and that I had not let myself feel it until that instant, and that the form I had served so faithfully had no line for an old officer's grief any more than it had a line for a young soldier's, and that I was tired in that moment of being made of stone. So there we stood, the officer with his blade at the salute and the private with his rifle at the present, the two of us facing a 23-year-old widow and a 4-month-old boy in the great cathedral of the kingdom, honoring her with the highest tribute either of us possessed, against every rule that governed the place. And then the regiment moved. I did not order it. I want that on the record more than I want anything else in this account. I gave no command, no signal. I had my back to the ranks and my eyes on the widow. What happened because of what was in those men already, put there over years, much of it put there by the man in the box. Behind the front pews, the first rank of dress reds came to its feet. Then the second. Then the third. Not as a drill movement, there was no unison to it, no single sound, just the long, ragged rising of men who had each decided, one at a time and all at once, that they were not going to sit in their seats while their officer and the youngest of their number stood for one of their own. They came up out of the pews, rank on rank, the red wool and the brass catching the elsewhere light, and they brought their right hands up in the salute, every man of them, 100 and more white gloves rising in a wave that started at the front and ran to the back of the nave, and out the open doors into the square, where I learned afterward, the crowd that could not get and saw the gloves rise through the doorway and understood, without being told, that something was being given. And the men among them who had served, the old ones with their campaign ribbons on civilian coats, brought their own hands up on the cathedral steps under the gray sky. And Sergeant Vance, the closed door, the steadiest hands, the man who had gone to look on the body so a stranger would not, Sergeant Vance was the first of the standing ranks to move, and the only one of them weeping when he did. He did not hide it now. The wound he had held shut with his own hand all morning came open at last, and he let it, standing tall in the front of the risen regiment with his face wet and his salute exact, and I understood that the permission Calder had created reached the soldiers too, not only the widow. We had all been forbidden to grieve. We had all been waiting, without knowing it, for someone with the courage to go first. A boy of 22 had gone first, and his sergeant of 20 years had followed him into it without a flicker of shame. And that is the regiment as it truly is when you strip away the wall. Not men who do not feel, but men who carry what they feel so that the person beside them does not have to carry it alone. The chaplain stopped speaking. He had no words for it, there were none in his book. He simply stepped back from the lectern and bowed his head. And Lord Harrowmere, the gray man, the keeper of the protocol, the one I had been certain would end Calder's career and likely mine, Lord Harrowmere stood at his place in the front pew, and for a long moment he did nothing, his hand still gripping the rail, his face working through something I could not read. He was the senior man present. The whole apparatus of correction was his to command. One word from him and the breach would be entered in the record, and the men would be made to sit, and the kingdom would be told that discipline had been restored. He did not say the word. Instead, slowly, he was not a young man, and it visibly cost him, Lord Harrowmere came to attention beside his seat, an old council lord in a black coat among the dress reds, and he raised his own hand, bare and ringed, in the salute. He was no soldier. His salute was not correct. It was the most correct thing I saw all day. I understood then that it was no longer a breach. A breach is one man stepping out of line. This was the line itself, redrawn. When the senior man present, the regiment entire, the chaplain, the veterans on the steps, and the crowd in the square all render the same honor at once, it is not insubordination. It is the institution deciding in a single wordless motion what it actually believes. And what the household guard of our kingdom decided, in the great cathedral, in front of the watching nation, was that the widow and the son of a man who died spending the highest thing he had on someone smaller than himself were owed the highest thing the rest of us had to give. Marin Wren rose to her feet. She did it slowly, with the child held against her, and no one helped her because everyone understood that she needed to do it herself. She stood in the center of the empty pew, surrounded by saluting men, the only person in the cathedral not rendering the salute because she was the one it was being rendered to. And she looked at Calder and at me, and out across the risen ranks of her husband's regiment, and the stone she had built around herself all morning, the stone I had taught her husband and her husband's friends to build, the stone we make of ourselves to survive the unsurvivable. That stone came down at last. She did not collapse. She wept, openly and without shame, standing tall while she did it, the tears running down a face she did not hide, and she lifted her chin and she let the whole kingdom see her grieve, because we had made it safe for her to do so. We had broken the silence that was crushing her. That, I understood at last, was what the salute was for. Not to honor the dead are past honor. To give the living permission to feel what the form had forbidden. To say to one young woman in the only language 100 soldiers possessed, "You are not alone in this, you are not required to be stone, we have you, lay it down." And then she did the thing that none of us expected, the thing that turned the moment from one a nation would remember into one it could not forget. She crossed the open floor to Private Tomas Calder, the boy still in her arms, and she stood before him while he held the present in honor of her, and she said quietly, "But the high stone carried it, the high stone carried everything that day. He told me about you. The one whose father died on the parade night. He said you understood the cost of a salute better than any man he knew." Her voice did not break. "He'd want you to know it was the best one he ever saw." Calder held the present. He could not answer. A guardsman at the salute does not speak, and besides, I do not think there were words in him. So Marin did what words could not. She lifted her son, Aldous Wren's son, 4 months old, with his father's ears, and she held the boy up, not to the cameras, not to the council, but to Calder, the way you offer a child to family. And she said, "When he's grown, I'll tell him a soldier saluted his mother on the day, and that it meant his father was loved. But you'll tell him the rest, won't you? You'll tell him true." It was the chaplain's own charge, spoken back, that it would fall to us to tell the boy his father true. And she was assigning it here in the open, to the one man in the kingdom who had loved Aldous Wren the way a brother loves a brother, and would carry that telling like a sacred duty for the rest of his life. Calder came off the present. Slowly, with full ceremony, he grounded his rifle. And then, and this is the only command I gave in the whole of it, and I gave it to myself as much as to him, I gave him the smallest nod. Permission. And Tomas Calder, 22 years old, reached out one white glove and laid it with infinite care against the back of the child's small head, the way Wren had described holding him, the way you touch the one thing in the world you would break every rule to protect. He held it there a moment. Then he drew himself up, and he said the second thing the kingdom would never forget, 4 words this time, rough and certain. "Every day, ma'am. Promise." That was the end of the breach, if it ever was one. The service went on. We carried Aldous Wren out into the gray light to the slow cadence, flawless again, the form holding us all the rest of the way as it is meant to. The standard was folded and given. The marker was set in the regimental yard where it stands now. By every measure of the order of service, the funeral of Corporal Aldous Wren was completed according to protocol, with one departure of some minutes' duration that the official record describes, in the careful language of such records, as a spontaneous rendering of honors by the assembled regiment, not directed by command. There was an inquiry. Of course there was. You do not break the protocol of a state funeral in front of the nation without the institution asking how it happened and who is to answer for it. I gave my account plainly, the same account I have given you, and I made it clear that the responsibility was mine, that I had seen Private Calder's intent and chosen not to prevent it, and that if a man's career was to end over it, the man should be the officer and not the private. I was prepared for it. I had served 30 years. It was not a bad note to end on. Lord Harrowmere chaired the inquiry, the keeper of the protocol, the gray man who had stood and saluted with a bare ringed hand. He let me finish my account, and he was quiet for a while, and then he said the thing that closed the matter. He said that protocol exists to honor the things the kingdom holds sacred, and that on the day in question the kingdom had been shown something it held more sacred than the protocol, and that a custom which could not bend to honor a man who died as Corporal Wren died was not a custom worth keeping rigid. He entered no charge. He recommended instead that the regiment consider formally, in time, what honors might be rendered to the families of the fallen, so that the next widow would not have to be saved from the silence by a private breaking the rules. They are still considering it. These things move slowly, but they are moving, and they were not moving before, and that is Aldous Wren's doing, paid forward by the boy he taught. Tomas Calder is a corporal now. He stands his posts as well as any man I have commanded, and better than most, and he visits a flat with a window that catches the morning, where a boy who is learning to walk knows him as the one who comes on the days his mother is tired, the one who carries him on his shoulders the way someone once described to a barracks full of laughing men. The boy does not yet know the word duty. He will. Calder will tell him true every day as promised, and one of the things he will tell him is that his father taught a frightened young soldier how to stand a vigil and how to love something enough to break a rule for it, and that the lesson held. I am back at my post. I am, by every account, the same officer I was, still the steady line, still the wall, still the man of no consequence at the head of the bier. The protocol holds me upright as it always did, and I serve it as faithfully as ever, because I know now exactly what it is for and exactly what it cannot do. It is the form that carries us when our hearts cannot. But there are a few times in a man's life, a very few, when the form becomes the thing that crushes the very grief it was built to carry, and in those times a soldier had better know the difference, and have the courage to spend the highest honor he owns on a living person rather than on a rule. I spent 30 years teaching men to be stone. The proudest thing I ever did was stand beside a boy the morning he taught me that the point of being stone is to know the 1 hour you must choose instead to be a man, and to render, when no regulation will allow it, the salute you owe a friend.